Welcome to the third series of webinars from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. Our intention with this series is to continue the conversation from the Emergency Services Show, where many of the speakers in our series have shared their work, but also to pick up new topics that you'll hear about at this year's show. For the first webinar in our third series, we turn to the topic of data and what we need to do with it to prepare ourselves for an AI future, artificial intelligence. For the first webinar, we'll be asking our speakers to share their work, insights and thoughts on the future. Our USP, of course, is that we are multi-agency, so I'm delighted we have police and fire represented today. We have a Q&A function on our website today, so we're encouraging you to join us in our conversation. We don't have any presentations or slides, it's a chat, and it's something to give you some insights to take away and chat with your colleagues back in the workplace. We also give you CPD accreditation for joining us today. Those of you watching us live today will get the CPD accreditation later, and watching on catch up, we do that on a monthly basis. Our intention today is to run for about 50 minutes, and that wraps up the beginning for us. So let's get started and see our speakers. They should come on the stage now. Great. Excellent. So I am delighted today to introduce Aimee Smith, Kate Boyle and Jo Mann. Aimee is Director of Data at the Metropolitan Police Service. Kate is Head of Data Services at the Police Digital Service. And Jo Mann is Head of Risk and Intelligence at Humberside Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to see you all. So let's kick this off. And so I'm really interested in data. I've done a lot of stuff about data over the years, and I'm really pleased that this webinar can focus, and I'm really, really grateful for you all for joining today. I suppose my first question is really, why do we care about data? Why is it a topic that we're talking about within the emergency services? So Aimee, do you want to kickstart that one? Tell us why we should care about data.
Yeah, I'll first of all tell you why, because it's obvious I care about data. I'll tell you why I think the public should care about data and why policing should care about data, and then it'll link to why I really care about it. So the public need us to care about data because there is so much going on in the sector, any emergency service, that transparency is critical. And to actually understand, unless you've had an interaction with somebody from an emergency service directly, you won't know how effective or efficient we are being other than through the media headlines. And actually, information and data is one of those things that can really bring people into an understanding of a service that they may never use. I think the reason policing needs to care about data is because there are so many volumes of data coming into police services and fire services all day long, every day. It's a fundamental part of what people do, that if they don't care about it, they will not be effective in their own decision making and they won't achieve outcomes for the public. And the reason I really care about it is because there's so much opportunity, an exciting opportunity to do things differently with data, to really, really improve the service we give to the public. So transparency, confidence and trust, and just actually being good at the work that we used to do very manually and analog way, we now have to catch up with the digital environment.
Brilliant. Okay, that's a great scene setter. So Jo, in a fire world, is that the kind of thing you'd be thinking about when you're trying to say to somebody, why should they care about data when it comes to fire?
Yes, absolutely. But I would also add into that prevention. The fire service is hugely invested in prevention, and we can't do that without data. We need that data to enable us to go to the right people at the right times for the right reason. We aren't just about putting fires out or rescuing people from tall buildings. We want to prevent people from dying in fires, and data is at the core of that.
Brilliant. Okay, so Kate, in terms of thinking about data, why we need to care about it in terms of what foundations to give us, we talked about this webinar being about setting up foundations for an AI future, but in terms of what those foundations are, what is it with the data that we need to do to sort of think about those foundations? What are the elements that we'd be thinking about when it comes to caring about the data? What sort of aspects are we talking about here?
Well, I think that's really broad, but I think for any business, whether it's emergency or not, any business needs to understand what data is critical to their outcomes.
Yeah.
They need to make sure it's of good quality. They need to make sure it all means the same thing. And they're the foundations of really that need to be in place before AI is even considered. running concurrently, I think one of the most important things is having the skill sets in any organisation to be able to do all of those things, do them well, do them once, and then, automate so that you can advance into that AI space, really. But it is, for me, Aimee and I have got a passion for this. It's quality, quality, quality. If the data isn't good, you're not going to get the outcomes you need at the end result.
Brilliant. And you've segued us nicely into our first topic, which is actually data quality, because it's one of the three big things we're going to talk about before we consider what the data is going to do to help us take advantage of AI approaches, and that is quality. So if we can't even get the cops to put the data in right, says Aimee Smith in a public forum I saw her at recently, I have seen many people in fire talking about not being able to get people to put data into the incident recording system properly. So how do we deal with that basic thing about, if we can't put the data in right, then we don't really stand a chance, do we? So how do we make data quality a sexy subject?
You mean it isn't? I don't know who that's to me, presumably me, because I said it, so now I've got to defend myself.
Defend your comment.
Well, I think the comment is right. I think the caveat I put around it is cops are told everything is important, I'll be honest, and maybe it's the same with firefighters. And so how do they know, if you're rolling around on the floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is really hard to say, could you just stop that a second and put their ethnicity and their name and address in really nicely. But at the end of the day, it will matter further down the chain. So I think engaging the people on the front line and getting really strong advocacy and leadership that data quality matters is important. But I think the data professionals can really help give a steer around, but which is the really critical data and which matters if we understand the business strategy. So we know what we're trying to achieve as a business, where we want to see improvements, and actually go, the 3 or 4 things that really matter for you to get right, cops on the front line to put in, is this. There's a secondary point about the tech enabling you to validate that or mandate that or improve that. That's a secondary point. But people have got to want to care about putting it in. And the conversation I have in the police service, and I don't know, Joe, if it's the same in fire, but they're the main users of the data. They're the main inputters and they're the main users. It's a very unique situation. And I say this a lot in public forums, but it isn't Tesco Clubcard where they rely on the public to put their data in to get some vouchers out, which works really well for them. This is cops putting in what's happening so that cops can learn about where they need to be next and where the big trends are and how to better service victims or prevent crime. So we just not quite made that connection, and it's probably because we're asking them to do everything 100% well, I imagine.
Okay, I like that analogy of the Tesco Clubcard. So is there a way in police or fire, or just generally in remote services, how you can show the value proposition, which is you give us some data, you'll see the value, but not immediately. So how do you do that? Joe, do you have any thoughts on that?
Potentially. I think that certainly our firefighters are always really keen on showing the work that they do and having people see that really visibly, the amount of work that they do that isn't just about incidents. So I think I've heard the term gamify, but I really hate it. I think that we need to Aimee is right. It is about education. It is about talking to them about why this is important, but we need to really tap into what is valuable to them. And for our firefighters, it is showing the amount of work that they do, because often it is hidden. If they turn up and they do a demo at a school, for instance, they want to get the credit for that. So we need to be making sure that they're recording everything properly, and that's why they're doing it. So appealing to their, what's in it for them, really, I suppose.
Yes. And Kate, you come from a commercial background, I believe, that you worked with them in banking before you joined PDS. Do you find the same issues from your previous experience about people being less willing to put data in because it's seen as being kind of a distraction or something boring you have to do?
Yeah, I think it's a blocker across every business. I think the difference in banking is that fundamentally, to get it, getting it right makes the organisation money, and money does very strong things to people, right? So there's an emotive point there to put it in and to get those business outcomes through. For me, I think it's around, when you talk to non-data professionals about the importance of the data, sometimes people can say it's all data, and that to me is a real sticking point. We've got to be able to encourage anybody using the data to understand the critical elements of that data. So, don't worry about 20 CDEs, just worry about those 10 that are going to align to a business outcome, make money, save lives, predict, where crime's going to happen. So for me, I think that's fundamental across any business. It's that business outcome and what is the critical data that will come to that outcome, and then cleanse that at pace.
I think attaching stories to it helps, and that's certainly what we've been doing with senior leaders in policing at the Executive Leadership Programme. It's, the Angelini report's really powerful for policing. If somebody had done a police national database check properly, and if someone had entered his VRM into the system and linked it to the last time his VRM was in the system, we'd have caught Wayne Couzens earlier.
Do you want to tell us what VRM means?
Sorry, a vehicle registration number. So,
right, okay.
If somebody inputting that data in a timely way had done it, if someone had used that data to make a connection, the outcome for Sarah Everard may have been different. And it's really powerful to attach that story, because that's something that is seen as boring, but it has an ultimate consequence. It might have had an ultimate consequence for the person putting it in. So there's like attaching your personal accountability, but there's collective accountability, and it's about doing that.
That's interesting, that story. So is that something you've just done in response to the Angelini report, or was that something you were already doing in the Met?
We were already doing it in the Met. But I think the Angelini is obviously, because it's a Met officer, so it's so much more powerful as a result to point to that very, very raw issue for us to make people listen and understand.
Yes. And so if you talk about making connections between data within your own systems, if you then want to take that data and then share it with others, or have other authorities, so that you can sort of start layering it, making sense of data, because you're getting different pots together, how do you do that in a way that there's the London Fire Brigade having access to your data, so they might have known something about Ben Couzens or David Carrick? Is that a direction to go in, so that you can start sharing to do that, and have because it's about the stories, it's about driving meaningfulness.
I'm smiling, Kate, because I know you want to answer this question.
Yeah, please do. I don't mind.
Yes. Long and short is yes. The power of good in any organisation when it comes to data is immense. Imagine how, brilliant it would be if we could safely, legally, and securely share data across government bodies. The insights that would gather from fire to police to national health to social work to criminal justice, just connecting, even if it was just 10 fields of data of what we know, how we can prepare officers, how we can prepare frontline workers to any kind of incident or crime or fire or anything like that. It would be so powerful. And for me, I get it. I get why we can't. I get that there would be a certain public perception of that, but I think the risk is mitigated by the outcomes that could achieve. And so Aimee knows I smile, because it's a huge passion of mine that I really want to start championing this across industry, to say, we've got to be able to do this. We're very clever people. Data people are very clever people. We must be able to pull some kind of data sets together for the greater good of society.
And I think the Angelini inquiry is very, very recent to us, but I'm thinking back to COVID and when people were sharing data. I think, Joe, we talked when we were chatting before about the webinar about how COVID was a kind of a catalyst to show that data sharing could work. Do you want to share with us what your experience was?
Yeah, so right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was asked by my chief fire officer to provide analytical support to the local resilience forum. And I've worked for Humberside for 31 years, and I've been trying for about the last 10 to share data with people, and usually failing miserably. But in this environment, I had so much data thrown at me. I was absolutely awash with it. But it was not in a great state to be able to use it. There was no context behind it. There was no understanding. There was no unique identifier that linked it all together. It was an absolute car crash, really. And the best that we managed to get from it was some vulnerability mapping. But actually, the best help at that point in time was some of the commercial companies that were offering products and tools and systems and open data that they didn't normally share for free. They were sharing that with us, and that became more meaningful because that data is always already pre-canned. So it kind of showed that in an emergency planning situation, people are willing to share that data. So we need to build on that, really, make sure that our data is in a situation where we can share it, that we can share all the metadata behind it and all of the understanding. And we actually draw some of these external companies in to help us because they are the ones with the expertise. But, you know, that really did open my eyes to the fact that, yeah, people are willing to share data, but under the right circumstances. So I don't feel like we've built on that yet, but I think that we could.
We had exactly the same thing during COVID, in that, I mean, it's my bugbear that people say it's data sharing that's the problem. It isn't. The legislation enables us to share pretty easily, particularly in times of crisis. But the speed at which we were able to share with partners who we find it difficult sometimes to share with, health service and police service really need to share faster, better, quicker in any situation. It's not always that easy. It absolutely was during COVID. And my reflection on that as to why that's important in an AI context is because most public sector bodies, when they're collecting data, are collecting known biased data sets, right? Because deprivation isn't equal, crime isn't distributed equally. The more we join our data sets together, when we want to apply artificial intelligence or advanced analytical techniques to that, we will understand more than we would as if we did it on our own data sets, which are inherently biased. We might smooth out some of that bias, and we also might understand intervention points far more easily by sharing together and putting a framework around the foundations for data to do that for AI in the future is critical. I mean, the government are talking about it, but I don't think the public sector bodies are talking about it together in that way, and they should be.
And do you think that's to do with skills and understanding of what the problem is, the framing, because it's seen as like a black box thing over there?
No, I think it's got nothing to do with how the AI is seen. I think fundamentally it's about budgets and leadership and what people are prepared to commit to and what their own personal time horizon is. And I'm sorry if that sounds too political coming up to an election in London, but I just think if you've got to give up some of your budget to make that happen, that's challenging in the current context and financial environment. If you're elected for a certain period of time and the change might not land for 10 years, is it worth you doing it? And I think that's the environment we're in. I mean, Kate will talk about this from a women's safety point of view. It's something she's been championing. Exactly the same problem.
Yes, Kate, you would. We talked before about women's safety being a topic of interest for yours. In terms of data sharing, the things that you've heard from Jo and Aimee, how does that work in that environment? What have you learnt and you can share with us?
Well, I think, VAUG, violence against women and girls, is one of the sort of like priorities of the government of today. It's, we've spoken to a lot of ministers who are saying to us, whilst it's a priority, we've got no data to show what's going wrong and we can't evidence it. Aimee and I are part of an organisation called Women in Data. That organisation established a women's safety steerco last year, and we've been working for about a year and a half to try and really use the data to change the outcomes under VAUG, both through a legislative view and a practical day-to-day view. And I suppose one thing that we can all agree on is there's no consistent meaning to the data across organisation to organisation. So I could easily go to Jo and say, Jo, I really need the fire data to match where women are vulnerable. So we've identified domestic abuse victims. Do you have any data on that? But Jo's meaning might not be the same as mine. So I think we need to get to the point where we've got consistent standards across industry. We've got consistent, definition. And I keep saying, if we talk to the serving police officers and the serving fire officers, they're going to think we're asking for masses of data here. I think we need 10 fields of data consistent, and the difference that would change to be able to go into government and say, this is where you need to put your money. Really are serious about protecting women and girls in this current climate. That's where the money's needed. And there's where the vulnerabilities sit across agency to agency. So yeah, it's something that we're putting a lot of thought into, isn't it, Aimee, of how we can do that on behalf of policing.
Right. And does that work at a national level in terms of organisations like the National Police Chiefs Council, National Fire Chiefs Council, the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives? Are those conversations happening at that level to enable that joined up standards driven approach?
I think they're happening in the individual organisations. It's just about getting some kind of forum together to get the right people at the table to say, how are you achieving it and how are you achieving it? And I think industry as a whole is very keen to do that. You know, financials, lots of CDOs come together very, very regularly to talk about how they're, you know, what their struggles are and how they're doing that. We should be doing that across public sector as well.
Right. Okay. All right. So it doesn't exist at the moment. There isn't like a forum for that cross-agency talking about data.
There's a Home Office and MOJ project to look at criminal justice data improvement. So there are initiatives like that are in place, but policing, for instance, doesn't yet have a national function that manages data. We've got a data board, we've got volunteers in that space, but have we got an actual body who are permanently employed to make sure that happens coherently just in our sector to then join it up with Joe's or others? We're some way off. Although the appetite's there, I just think it's taken us this long to convince people this is what they need. I think there's buy-in, but we're at the very start of it.
Okay. It's happening locally. Sorry, Catherine. It's happening locally for the as part of the Serious Violence Project. So we're certainly part of our local area where we're starting to share the data on that front, but nationally, definitely not.
Okay. So we have a question here that I'd like to go to at this point, which asks us from your perspective, to what extent have operational areas of policing and fire been given the change support required to adopt new ways of working? Now, my assumption with that is that the support to use data in the way that they work. So what are we giving? And it brings us on nicely actually to the next section, which is about skills. Which is, I'm going to take that as the perspective of this question, which is around skills, and are we giving people the tools to do this? To what extent do you think your organisations are doing that? Are you equipping people to do the job you want them to do? Joe, how's it working fire?
So the first step we're taking is actually redesigning our system so they're much simpler. We've got a system that records our activity in the communities, and that's really historically been quite complex. So we're trying to make that as simple as possible so that less training and that all that kind of stuff is needed. We do quite a bit of e-learning around data and data quality, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's a really good point that we train our firefighters in lots of things, and that's a burden sometimes, that some of the softer skills that they need, maybe we don't give them enough. In terms of using technology, all that kind of stuff. So it's a good challenge, to be fair.
Yes. Okay. And in the Met, how does it work in your force, where you have all of these brand new police officers who just turning up in London to as part of the Uplift programme? Are they getting data training as part of their induction into the force?
Yeah, I mean, we've embedded it in a different way. So we've done two things simultaneously, and I think Kate should probably build on what I say second, but about what we do for data professionals. But in frontline world, we've tried not to make it data training. We've tried to embed the importance of data quality, entry, professional curiosity, how you ask questions at the start in recruitment. Yeah. It's now embedded in our promotion exercise. So, for instance, all the people who went for inspectors process in the Met the last time round all had to do a data exercise where they were given loads of information, they had to assimilate it, they had to then feed back and do an chief officer briefing on the back of it. And that's rolled out into our senior leader programme too. We have got really short, sharp kind of videos that Kate's developed for us nationally that we roll out in the Met that are like, literally a minute long, and say, what do we mean when we say data sharing? Things like that. And we've had some bespoke information asset owner training videos done, online training for information asset assistants. So kind of getting the business ownership of the data, the things we've really focused on in the Met. We've also been developing professional job profiles and career pathways for people in data, aligned to the government's digital and data framework, so that the pay scales are right, the retention is right. And I'm throwing to Kate now, because she's basically taken that mantle on and now made that standardised across all of policing. There's no point in the Met doing it and everyone else not. We can't share talent that way.
Yeah, so I have. I've so previous to this, I ran a data culture function at High Street Bank, where we did quite a lot of innovative ways of training people, and part of my role was to establish job families across an organisation. So you can't talk to policing about job families. They've got a tough enough job. But in the background, I have created a data talent strategy, which talks around taking their current roles, but bringing them wider. So we're going from, we've adopted, as Aimee said, the DDAT, the Data, Digital and Tech framework that is government wide. And we've adapted those roles for policing for a data analytics specialist, which takes us from around about, I think we currently in the framework, we have 6 or 7 roles. We're looking at 23 different roles spread across 7 different job families. So it's going to be quite huge. But what we're hoping is that will actually give our data analytics professionals, a community. We can compete against a very, very, very competitive market where fintechs and finance and banking are just taking the talent because they can pay the salaries. And we want to give people the opportunity to marry, the need to protect life and the want to do what they're doing with a very solid framework around attraction, retention and development. So more to come on that, but it's been a labour of love to this point, hasn't it, Aimee? But, we're hoping to launch that pretty soon.
Okay, that sounds really exciting. Are you sharing that with fire and ambulance and other parts of the blue lights? Is that something
so I speak to somebody in Joe's world in fire who is doing a very similar thing across fire. I'll let Joe talk about that, but they are building very similar data skills around that. So yes, we talk cross public sector.
Yes, because there's something in the Q&A I noticed of the NFCC. One of the colleagues are watching us talking about rolling out a data literacy training program. Is that something, Joe, you're familiar with? Can you share a bit more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I worked actually on the working group that brought all of that together, but it has been published and it's a step in that right direction of where to go for training, what kind of skills do all of the different roles need. When I first started in this role, there was very little for fire. I had to actually go and do analyst training with police forces because they were so much more advanced than we were. But the NFCC are really bringing a lot of things together now for us. Lots of guidance, lots of tools. So that will really help us, and it will bring consistency. I mean, it's Steve Taylor who's put the question on. He's the data lead for the NFCC, and he's rightly so looking at the data literacy and the data quality skills that we all need at this point in time. So yeah, hopefully that will move fire on and help us catch up with the police a little bit.
Excellent, good. Oh, that all sounds like really good work going on. Before we move on to the crux of this, which is using the AI to improve our services, I just want to capture this last question, which is around the importance of collecting data to generate insight. What's the strategy to control access to data? GDPR and shadow data. I'm not sure what shadow data is, but some concerns here about controlling access. Aimee, you referenced GDPR earlier. You put your hand up. I can't see because the question's in front of me. But you seem to suggest that actually the environment is there. It's all ready. So is that, where are we with that?
Yeah, I don't think people should underestimate how much we take, how important we take Data Protection Act, GDPR, Part 3. Honestly, it's the lifeblood of the data office in policing. I suspect it's the lifeblood of the data office in fire service too, or certainly Part 2 will be. So there already is great governance around ethics, legality, the use of DPIAs, independent sign-off by the data protection officer, ownership of any data processing by a very senior business sponsor. So the question was about collecting more and more data. I just want to be really clear. We don't really have to keep collecting more and more. We just have to make better use of the stuff that we've got. We've got thousands of data. I'm not even exaggerating. 1,900 data assets just in the Met, right? So it's to me about so I think there's a strong rigor and control around Part 2 and Part 3 of the Data Protection Act in all of policing, not just in the Met. I think that governance is there. And we really take those responsibilities seriously, because let's be honest, where it's gone wrong for us, the public trust has slipped. Losing that gangs violence matrix, transparency and public trust, particularly in the Black community, it's going to take a long time to recover that. So police service Northern Ireland, what happened over there, basic mistakes and human error, but it really matters. So we really do have quite tight controls around that compared to other organisations, I think. So yeah, we take those seriously. I think the shadow data is probably about the use of synthetic data, which is something that is being trialled in policing. We've got external expert help, doing that for the sector. But again, I think the rigour and controls around there. And we've also got an AI covenant for policing, which I think from which we will probably get a cross force framework for AI is what I think will come out of that, which is another good thing. We don't want everybody doing something different.
Can you share with us what you mean by synthetic data?
So taking real data and then mocking it up with made so you're not using real people's personal data, but you make a synthetic data set that reflects that. So it might have the ethnicity, the gender balance, all the things that we see in real data, but you anonymize it, and then you can test your algorithms and various other things on that.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. So let's move us on to talking about what we can. So we've created this wonderful world where we have great data skills, we have great data quality, we have fantastic sharing. So we can use this stands at the foundations of our sort of being able to use artificial intelligence. I wonder sometimes it's just a bit of a fad, and whether actually this is something that's going to be meaningful to the emergency services in terms of automating repetitive tasks. Is it good for what I would call the grunt work, the things that need to be done over and over and over that a machine can do, but the things that actually bring insight and quality to what we need? How do we sort of harness that? So should we start with the basics and go with just how do you automate repetitive tasks? Is that what AI is good for in terms of the blue lights? Is that where we should start? Or is that just unambitious? What do you think, Aimee?
Oh gosh, I thought you were going to go somewhere else first.
I can if you want me to.
Well, no, I don't think it's unambitious. I think it's realistic for the quality of data that we want to attach it to, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think it's unambitious. I think it's a good start, because what you've got to get from the people inside the organisation is the trust in the tech and the data when you do it, right? So if they can see value of removing repetitive and what they might be considered bureaucratic tasks, that's definitely a positive. But I don't think it's where the ambition should end.
Okay, all right. So we've got the AI doing the repetitive things. Can you give us an example? What would be a repetitive task? I could say to you anything you could take the drudgery out of, what would it be?
So in terms of where we're already doing it with robotics, it's when the public enters something now online to report a crime, a robot is taking that information and attaching it into a force's source crime recording system. Right. So rather than a human being having to take that out or rekey it or ring them back and ask it, I mean, that's the kind of level we're talking about, where we're trying to just, it's not rocket science, it's just filling a gap in rekeying.
Yeah. And is that happening in all forces? Does everybody do that?
I suspect some forces will be far more advanced and won't need to do that. But yes, it will be happening in forces, that kind of transferring information from one system to another. Up in Lancashire, they're actually using machines to clean the data that goes into their integrated operations system.
And by cleaning it, what does that mean? Does that mean making sure it's consistent, that the name's all spelt the same way, that kind of stuff? Yeah,
finding links and removing duplicates is the key, because it's a poll database. So they're doing the work on that. Okay. Really good.
Because the reason I ask these questions about the basics is sort of this concern with AI, which is around ethics and bias. So you introduce a whole bunch of bias and ethics into your data set, and then you make decisions on it. It means your decisions have bias. So I just wonder, in terms of thinking about where you go from that position where you're in having gone through the simple task you just talked about to the next stage, how do we think about that bias and ethics question as you move along the sort of spectrum, I suppose, of AI? Kate, what are your thoughts on that?
We have a really good model in policing from that ethics point of view, both for analytics ethics and data ethics. I consider them quite, a little bit different in what they're trying to get to. But from an analytics or an AI perspective, Police Scotland are the front runners here, and they've done an exceptional job. And they run a ethics steerco, if you like. So anybody across Police Scotland that wants to start any project of any kind has to go and consult with this steerco. Have we done it before? You know, what are the pitfalls? What are the dangers? Where are you going to see bias if you run the data the way it is? I think partly, you know, to be able to get to that point, policing talks a lot about AI. It talks a lot about using things like Copilot and, you know, the things that are over there. If I had one wish for policing, it would be for them to understand the difference of machine learning and machine learning ops to actually creating dashboards. It's not to call them, it's not to say that they're, you know, they don't know what they're doing. They do. But I think policing would, if we had to put money somewhere, it'd be in that vast machine learning ops that would just cleanse these data sets consistently to be able to then use. And I think we could then tackle the ethics and the bias point of view from that, because it's the rules you put into the machine learning that would bring that out. Yeah.
So should we not be talking about AI? We should be talking about machine learning. Should we just sort of park AI to one side? Do you see machine learning as a subset of AI? I mean, I don't know.
I do, but I think for me, policing's got to do machine learning before it even tackles AI in any shape or form. That's not to say we're not tackling AI, because we have got good pockets of AI, and we've got, you know, a good department now that talks very much about the machine learning before the AI. So I think it's that education layer of the art of the possible, so forces can then tap into what they actually need, which part of it they need.
Okay, and so in fire, Jo, are you talking about machine learning? Is this a conversation you're having, sort of data circles in fire?
Yeah, we've actually in Humberside been using machine learning for the last 3 years for creating our prevention and protection risk profiling. And the NFCC have created a machine learning risk model for dwelling fires, which is very similar to the route that we took. I was really fortunate that I managed to procure a junior data scientist from university, and he's actually we've been journeying together, him learning the ropes and us learning about machine learning. So yeah, I think it is starting to make its way into fire. I think, again, we're a little bit probably behind the police, but I'm hoping that, I was on an AI forum this morning that the NFCC had put on, and they're looking at how they can support fire in doing this. So I think you're right. It does need to be that logical journey and do it safely. And potentially we maybe need to wait for some of the bigger companies like Microsoft to really put that safety net around us in terms of using AI instead of, you know, just going off and using ChatGPT. That could be quite dangerous, really.
Okay, so we use the terms machine learning of artificial intelligence, and I wonder if the public knew that, if you said to the public, oh, the Met Police is introducing machine learning to do this thing, do you think that they would have trust that you would do that in a way and look after their data? Do you think they care whether you're using it or not? What is the public perception, do you think, here?
Yes, it's a really good question, because I don't think it's got a singular answer. So, because we had all of this around live facial recognition. So we have an ethics panel in London. It's co-chaired between the Met and MOPAC, and it has ethicists on it who are nothing to do with policing at all, to check and challenge. And when we went through the rolling out of facial recognition, the public are really supportive in the use of facial recognition if they think we're targeting it for serious and violent crime, terrorism, and then it kind of, and it's still even quite high if we're looking for wanted missing offenders and burglars. So the kind of average person who responds to those surveys is pretty positive about the use of that capability. Explainability is the key for me. So I don't think we'd have a challenge about saying we're using machine learning if we were able to explain it in a clear and simple way why we were using machine learning and why there wasn't an alternative. We absolutely have a commitment. We will not do anything without human in the loop. So we will explain where the human gets involved in that decision making. So I think there is public appetite for it, because the public, mainly, who don't come into contact with police the majority of the time, are still committed to seeing bobbies on the beat. And that's still the political will, and that's still the ask of the public. So if we can show that we're using AI, machine learning, Gen AI, whichever you want to take, bureaucracy and time wasting, or as they might see it, out, and put more cops back doing prevention, doing investigations, doing crime fighting, I think the public are far more supportive of that than perhaps the media might have us believe.
And does that go back to your concept of stories from earlier then? Do you need to kind of tell the story to people to make it understandable, that explainability side of things?
Yeah, and it's the same. Data aside, it's the same with any policing tactic. Explaining to the public why stop and search is important, an absolutely critical tactic for saving lives and taking lives off the street, is a story we have to tell. And we have to tell it to convince everybody, not just the people who like to see it from afar, but the people who are experiencing being stopped and searched, which is largely young black men. We have to be able to tell the story of why we're doing what we're doing, so we can be held to account for it.
Yeah. And do you think, Joe, in fire, in terms of the story of why fire would use AI, would be easier to explain because the nature of the way the public perceives fire? Does it make any difference?
Yeah, potentially, because we are such a strong prevention organisation. I think it would be easier to explain that, we're looking to find vulnerable people to keep them safe from fire. There is always this feeling that fire is a much more trusted organisation than police, sadly, because we're not trying to prosecute people. So I think that potential is there, that the public may understand that more of us. And it's something I've thought about quite a lot, actually, in terms of data sharing, because I don't know if the public think that we share data more than we actually do. I think they probably expect us to do that, but there isn't really the intel about that. And I think it would be good to do a few more public surveys, really, to understand what they really understand about what we're doing with data and how much they do agree with.
Yeah. But I wonder fundamentally whether it is about, people just want safe streets. They want to see their family safe, community safe. Mm-hmm. The means by which you get there is maybe less of concern to them, unless it's getting the headlines in the newspapers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So just conscious of time. So I think we've explored an awful lot of things there in terms of looking at why we care about data, why it's important that the quality is there, that we have the skills to use it, and that we share it meaningfully with other public agencies and potentially the commercial sector as well. I suppose what I'm interested in now, in terms of sort of thinking towards the end of our discussion, is around how do we improve things. So what are the keys to moving things forward? So is it leadership? Is it, do we need more sort of scientific advisor type units? You've got one in policing, maybe need one in fire, to sort of drive innovation and create innovation within the space. What do we feel about leadership? Is the leadership there in both of your worlds at the moment when it comes to this?
It is in mine, absolutely. My organisation is really into innovation and developing the service for the benefit of the public. Yeah.
But do we need all chiefs to be, data champions? Is that what we're after?
I think we're moving towards that. I think the products that the NFCC Data, Digital and Technology Group are bringing out will help push us in that direction. But I'm certainly not seeing anyone that's not wanting to do this.
I think I've absolutely seen a tipping point from data being boring, which I will not let people say, actually, in my presence, but a tipping point from chiefs thinking it's the right thing to say that data is boring, through to chiefs not daring to say that data is boring, right? So we've seen that shift in the last 3 years is absolutely tangible. People now turn up on the executive leadership programme for policing ready to learn about data. They want to know more, and they come with some knowledge. That's a shift that's happened quite quickly. The acid test for me, and this is for policing, but I'm sure it applies, Joe, to chiefs in fire, is if those 43 forces then agree that they'll do things once and well, as a sector, when it comes to data, that's the acid test for me. We'll have one set of standards, we'll have one set of things that are important, we'll have one framework for how we do it, and we'll champion and drive innovation under that framework. That's the acid test for me.
Okay, so that sounds like nirvana to me in terms of digital service.
I genuinely think. See, I challenge that. I honestly think we'll get them there. I think budgets being what they are, and lifespan of a chief being what it is, I think I've only got to convince the 3 cohorts at the next chief, the wannabe chief officers. I think we'll get there.
And just to back that up
enjoying your positivity.
Just to back that up a bit, on behalf of Aimee and the National Police Data Analytics Board, me and my team conducted data maturity assessments across 43 forces. And they are all telling us the same thing, that the highest scoring component was leadership, that their leaders are aware in each force. But what's the next space? How can we help them at a national level? So I think the heart and minds are there, aren't they, Aimee? We've just got to figure out how we do it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, that is good. That is good to hear. I mean, in terms of that innovation space, so we talked in one of our briefings about it's all very well putting money into things, but if you don't sustain it with funding long term, then you actually won't get the change you want to see. So, in terms of money, do you need to put bids in to get more cash? Should it be done at the national? Should it be the STAR program, perhaps in the MPCC, where they put money into sort of incubate new ideas? Is money a big issue in terms of driving change forward when it comes to data and the sort of AI world that we're talking about here?
It certainly is in fire. It certainly is in fire, because there are big differences between what fire services can afford. We've got some really great systems that other fire and rescue services can't afford to purchase. So I really think that there needs to be some support with technical infrastructure and the data skills and the training to help those services that have less money than others. That has to happen. Okay, all right, Aimee, Nanette, you're the biggest one. You must have all the cash.
Yeah, that's what they all think. That's why they want to lop it off us. No, I think so. We've absolutely invested in this space. The Met has chosen to spend money in this space, no doubt. Is it spending a bigger proportion, the right proportion of its budget on looking after its data assets and the skills that do it? I would argue probably not yet, but the ambition's there. I think the money is and the will is there across all forces. I'm more bothered about what all forces do collectively, if I'm honest with you. And if the Met can lead the way on it, brilliant. But I'm more bothered about them coming together. But that requires sustainable funding to do so. And even if all forces said, yeah, lock 10% of our budgets, build the biggest data capability there is, that's Nirvana, by the way, they do that, their budgets are still only year on year, right? So it's the way the sector is funded is the issue, and that's not a lever I can pull, and it's probably not a lever chiefs can pull either. So it's a governmental lever, that one.
Yeah, so you talk about 3-year funding settlements.
Yeah.
So we get a bit of certainty. Yes, okay. Brilliant. So that leaves me to ask you my final question, which is, so we're looking to give our listeners one piece of advice to go away with, to go and have a discussion with somebody about. So if they want to go and talk about getting data infrastructure right to smooth the way to adopting AI in their organisations, what is your one piece of advice? What's the thing they should go away and do? Jo, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's what we're currently doing in Humberside Fire, which is our digital services team are working on transforming our data so that it can be used more easily in any application as well as AI. So we're working on resolving some of those data quality issues, but also extracting those data quality issues so that we can really work on them so that they're a lot more visible. And that's what you've got to do before you do this, is get your data in a situation where it can be used in anything easily and shared easily.
Okay, so they need to find the right person who's responsible for those kind of things in their organisation, presumably somewhere in perhaps an IT department. Okay, Kate, what about you? What's your piece of advice to our listeners about how they smooth the way?
Don't tackle it all at once. So have very clear use cases that are mapped to your business outcomes, or in this case, our public sector outcomes. But what is it you want to do, and only focus on the data that helps you get there, as opposed to all the other data that's just going to confuse the hell out of you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And Aimee, last word from you.
Find your advocates. Do not have data. I made this error, by the way, everyone. Do not have data people telling everyone how important data is. Get the crustiest, oldest cop, firefighter, investigator you can find that is the most respected with gravitas, and get that person to stand up alongside a couple of others, because we've got a few, to tell people why data matters.
What a great way to end. Thank you very much. I'm sure that'll be very useful advice to everybody, which just leaves me, unfortunately, we have to draw it to a close because we've come to time, but it's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm grateful to you all for your time today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to wrap us up now. So I think that was a really interesting discussion. We've covered lots and lots of topics, and I'm hoping that our listeners will go away with at least some inspiration to start thinking about what their organisation could look like when it comes to using artificial intelligence, and what are the foundations, because whilst it might seem like a bit of a fad, I suspect it is actually here to stay and will make a big difference over time. So let's get the foundations right. So I'd just like to thank my speakers. So thank you for listening to us today. The webinar will be available on catch up via our website, so you can catch that. So I'll share that with colleagues. Any notes will be hosted there as well. You get CPD accreditation for attending today and on catch-up. We will send that through to you to your email address. Our next webinar is on 25th of April, next Thursday. We'll be looking at speaking up culture and how that's working across the emergency services. That's with David Crawley from Crime Stoppers and Suzanne McCarthy from the National Guardian's Office. So join us then at 2 o'clock if that's of interest to you. In the meantime, do visit our website on www.emergencyservicestimes.com and sign up for our weekly digest to stay up to date. It just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching.